Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. In this episode, we're going to cover the latest news stories for October of 2024, and we've got an interesting update on the Arkansas lithium boom that's going on, Justin, and a lot of activity in that area, and then some other interesting stories this month as well.
You said it, Matt. Yep, and the conversation about lithium continues on, and we've talked about this a lot in some of the former shows, but it's really getting to the point that now we're talking about what our mineral owners owed for royalties as far as percentage goes. Is it going to be handled like oil and gas, or is mining going to set a precedence? And this article kind of goes into the issue in Arkansas where a group of activists kind of pushed against the operators looking to set a lowball royalty percentage. And the article goes on to say that an administrative law judge decided on Thursday to delay an Arkansas Oil and Gas Commission hearing that was to consider setting a royalty rate on what lithium mineral owners would be paid for the battery-grade lithium extracted from their brine lands. The hearing, which has been set for Tuesday morning in El Dorado, is postponed to a yet unset date. So this is good news, Matt, for mineral owners. It allows them to kind of prepare themselves and show up. And we were talking a bit before the show, and you mentioned something I thought added a lot of context, and that's that previously in this conversation, some reports had come out about profitability statements for extracting lithium. And so it's not just mineral owners kind of just looking to be paid more. There's some data that's floating around, and I'm sure the oil companies will come to the table with their data as far as how profitable this is. And there'll be hopefully an honest, open, fair conversation in front of a judge about what is the value here and is it fair?
Yeah, that's a great point. And this is an update. So if you want to go back to the September news episode, we did more of a deep dive on those talking points that Justin mentioned, specifically to what the South Arkansas Minerals Association thought was a fair royalty and what they were proposing, and then what the profitability was based on some data supplied by some of the operators back in the original applications for these lithium projects. So yeah, to your point, Justin, I think it's a good step in the right direction that they're going to take their time to evaluate this and hopefully come up with a number that is equitable for both sides, that fairly compensates royalty owners based on the value that's there, and then also that allows these companies to make money because, frankly, they're not going to move forward with these projects if they're not profitable. So it's in the royalty owner's best interest to ensure that the projects are profitable, but then also they get their fair share. So there needs to be a little bit of horse trading that goes on. And so there was quite a bit of activity from the South Arkansas Minerals Association. They objected to the original application for the 1.28% royalty. And of course, the five publicly traded companies, the sort of big five, they call them, Standard Lithium, Albemarle, Lanxess, Tetra Technologies, and Saltworks, which is an ExxonMobil subsidiary, were the ones that had originally proposed that rate. And they had asked to postpone the hearing. And so back to the drawing board, it sounds like, which is hopefully going to set us off in the right direction here. And then related to that, Justin, you want to talk about this next one, which is about some big plans the U.S. government has for these lithium projects.
You said it, Matt. Yeah. And you know, the news is just ringing of the, you could say excitement, you could say the hopefulness in lithium extraction in the United States. But the article is titled here, Department of Energy plans separate $225 million grant to Standard Lithium, TerraVolta, and for lithium projects in Lafayette County region. The article talks about the U.S. government's ambitious plans to boost domestic lithium production. Quote from the article here, the United States Department of Energy may invest a total of almost $500 million into the construction of lithium production facilities in Lafayette County and a second undisclosed location in the Texarkana area. The Department of Energy said in a press release Friday, September 20th, 2024, that it plans to award $3 billion to 25 selected projects across 14 states, boosting the domestic production of advanced batteries and battery materials nationwide. And Matt, we've long talked about that to meet the green initiatives, to really start heading in that direction, battery technology is really the thing that's holding us back. And not only that, but it's a national security thing at this point because we do rely on batteries for so much. And so this has become a much larger conversation. And in my opinion, Matt, it's time. It's time that the government got involved and started to pump some money into this so that we can move forward.
Yeah, I think it's good. If you want to see any sort of federal grant money going towards energy technology, it's, I think standing up a domestic lithium supply chain would be pretty important. We depend heavily on China, and there's oftentimes some adversarial relationships that we have with China on different trade issues. And so it's something that I think, to your point, is so ingrained in everything that we have, from cell phones to electric vehicles to all the lawn equipment that I have that has rechargeable batteries, that we need to have a source of this here in the United States. And to the extent that we have the resource, which we do, we need to develop it responsibly, convert it into the final end products that can be made into batteries and battery materials. And so this $3 billion in grants is a step in the right direction. I suppose if we're going to be spending federal money on anything like this, then setting something up to allow them to build the facilities to start to process the lithium and to be able to build the plants to make the batteries and things like that. And we'll link to the Department of Energy article. There's a map there that shows where all of these projects are located, and it's not just in Arkansas and East Texas, it's all over the country. So there's even here in Colorado, there's one for Solid Power Operating Inc., which I assume is a battery company. There's stuff all in the East Coast, around the South, to the Gulf Coast, into the Midwest. There's stuff everywhere. So this is definitely going to be widespread. It seems like they're looking at really setting up that domestic supply chain for battery manufacturing again, which is great. One of the things that this article mentions related to the stuff we've been talking over the past several months is related to the Southwest Arkansas projects. And this article is from the Magnolia Reporter. So that's, I think, in Lafayette County, Arkansas. So that grant to Standard Lithium will support the construction of a central processing facility for the phase one of their project there. And that's designed to annually produce around 22,500 tons of battery quality lithium carbonate. And so we've been talking a lot about the exploration and drilling for these lithium wells and extracting the brine. But once you get that brine out of the ground, you have to do something with it. And so these grants are going to go into the projects to process it, which is great. So yeah, again, I think it's going to be important going forward. If we do want to continue to electrify everything, which seems like that's the focus, we need to have that domestically controlled, while simultaneously developing all of the reliable and affordable forms of energy, whether it be nuclear, natural gas, all those things. But then, batteries are going to be important. I think for modern technology and all the things that we use, we need to start to stand up manufacturing in the United States of those things again, since all of that's sort of been offshored over the years. And it's great to see that coming back to the U.S.
You said it, Matt. Something the article doesn't specifically mention, but I think it's important to highlight is not only is this grant money going to flow into the economy and help to support these projects, but this also paves a way for private money to be more comfortable as far as investments go. And for oil companies, it's been kind of a dry season for the ability to secure funding. And I'm sure that this will help both the private and public money to help fund projects because bankers are bankers, and when the government gets behind something like this, it really helps to support their willingness to invest and see it as an opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right. Well, this next one here is maybe not such great news. It's titled Los Angeles Man Steals $1.5 Million from Mineral Rights Owner. And there's a quote from the article that says, a California man has pled guilty in federal court in Midland of 2 counts of wire fraud. According to court documents, Mitchell Vaughn Lee of Los Angeles acquired and utilized personal identifying information of a mineral rights owner to access the victim's royalty account with Diamondback Energy. It goes on to say that he diverted royalty payments totaling around $1.5 million from their royalty account to a bank account in his control. And in 2022, executed a search warrant. And he was not a very smart criminal. So I guess, the good thing is that it was pretty easy to figure out that he was the one that did it. So they recovered a firearm and direct deposit change forms for Diamondback Energy with the victim's name and unique non-public owner number, basically, for their oil and gas royalty account with Diamondback Energy. So, I guess it's the story as old as time where people will look for unsuspecting people, and, you know, especially with all of the information that is publicly available now, the dark web, all that stuff, you know, you have all these hacks that are occurring and personal information's going out there. It's even more important, I think, to be vigilant around setting up unique passwords with whatever financial accounts you have, whether it's your oil and gas royalty, owner relations accounts with individual operators, or anytime you have the ability to set up two-factor authentication, which would be a unique, changing PIN that you could enter that would be necessary to actually log into the account. I think that's a key thing to start doing because of these hacks. I know in the past several weeks, I've had my personal email hacked twice. And we have a service provider. So like we've talked about several times, Justin and I are board members of NARO, National Association of Royalty Owners. And one of our service providers sent me a phishing email on Monday of this week. And it was clear that her email had been hacked as well. And so I called her up and she knew about it and she was working through support and trying to get that fixed. But, it's getting ever more sophisticated to where before it was just a phishing email that came from some obviously, fake email address or someone else's email address. So this is sort of hypothetical here, but for example, you have an Energy Link account, you get an email from something like Embarrass Energy Link where it says, hey, come log into your account. We're asking that you change your password, click this link. Be sure that you understand who the email is really from. And, rather than clicking a link on any email, if you're suspicious, type in the URL for that website, go in and log in and see, is there a notification? Are they actually asking you to do that? Because these, with AI, we were talking before we hit record, Justin and I, about custom chatbots and all these kinds of things and how it's getting even more sophisticated and, harder to tell when something is, a phishing attempt or if it's an actual communication related to one of your financial accounts. So I think that's just another warning here. This seemed like an old school, type of fraud case, but kind of my mind goes to, this is ripe territory for fraudsters to go after people's royalty information by seeking that personal identifying information. And then once they get that owner number, they could spoof your email or they could impersonate you and claim to want to change your direct deposit or whatever. So that's really important to be monitoring that. And it's another reason to stay on top of your royalties here.
Yeah, you said it, man. And, it's really taking advantage of somebody who might be unaware. And it'll be interesting to see if over the next few years, there's some more protections put into place. But hopefully this doesn't become something we hear about a ton. We've covered a couple stories of it in the past, but it is a vulnerable area. So I hope that we'll see changes in the future to help protect this or kind of increase the security with this.
Yeah, I agree. And I think moral of the story, unique passwords for every website. And don't worry having to memorize those, get a password manager, all the best practices. And you can Google how to secure your passwords. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of information. But, I think that's the key thing here is just you need to put your defenses up more and more as these folks are getting more and more sophisticated. But yeah, good to see this guy got caught. I guess the moral of the story here is when you do bad things, you'll get caught. And certainly he faces right now, looks like 60 years imprisonment for felon in possession of a firearm. And then for the wire fraud case, 20 years in prison for each count. So this gentleman's going to be locked up for the foreseeable future, which I think is good, but too bad that it had to happen in the first place.
Yeah, you said it, man. Yeah, you said it. All right, our next story here is from OPEC. And this has been OPEC's tune now, it seems like, for a little while. But the heading of the article here is OPEC says phasing out oil is just a fantasy. OPEC's latest world oil outlook for 2024 makes it clear that peak oil demand is not on the horizon. Despite ongoing discussions around transitioning to renewable energy, OPEC forecasts global oil demand to grow significantly, reaching over 120 million barrels per day by 2050. The projection is driven by strong demand in non-OECD countries, which are expected to see the majority of growth. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that OECD, is an intergovernmental organization comprising of 38 member countries founded in 1961 to stimulate economic progress and world trade. The OECD countries are primarily developed countries. The U.S. is a part of the OECD. So, Matt, this has kind of been the tune that OPEC has been speaking for quite a while now. And they do have the data to back it up. And, we've heard other people talking about this as well. I don't know that everybody is fooled that oil is going to be going away anytime soon, but it is something that, we're taking interest in trying to come up with all sources of energy as options, which is, I think, great.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need an all of the above strategy, all forms of energy. The key theme here is that these developing countries want access to energy, right? And so they're going to go to the most reliable, the most affordable forms. And for now, oil and gas meets that criteria. And so to the extent that they're going to go the path of least resistance, that means that oil, coal, all the fossil fuel based sources are still going to be in high demand as these countries go up that development curve and try to improve the economies and improve the standard of life for their citizens. And certainly, I think this is consistent with what we've seen from other areas and other organizations reporting these types of things. In fact, we did a deep dive on that in episode 245, which is the role of oil and gas in our energy future. So like Justin mentioned, we have things like solar, wind, nuclear, all these forms of low carbon energy, which are very important. But at the end of the day, countries that don't have access to energy, period, are going to get access first before then they go into the next step of maybe the lower carbon, more expensive form of that source of energy. So, this OPEC statement here, what the outlook underscores is the fantasy of phasing out oil and gas bears no relation to fact. OPEC said in its World Oil Outlook Forward. And what they're predicting is from 2023 to 2029, global oil demand is expected to increase by 10.1 million barrels per day. Again, with those developing countries, the non-OECD countries leading the way, adding 9.6 million barrels out of that 10.1 to reach 66.2 million barrels per day. And then meanwhile, demand in OECD countries is projected to stagnate, oscillating around 46 million barrels per day. So again, I think the moral of the story is we'll see growth kind of still steadily going upwards for the next several decades. And what that means for mineral and royalty owners is, the value of our assets is going to be dependent on that continued demand. And it sounds like that is going to be the case for the foreseeable future. So if you're worried about, well, we're going to stop using oil and gas, by 2030, I don't think that's a reality. It's certainly not going to happen. And so then what does that mean for how we look at our assets going forward? And, how do we look at it for the next generation? And is there going to still be oil and gas for them and all of that? And I think all the indicators are that is going to be the case. Certainly other technologies like solar, wind, nuclear power seems to be, we're getting a renaissance with nuclear, which is great because it is reliable and it's, low carbon. The difficulty, like we've talked about with these other forms of energy, is that the reliability. And, if you need to have power in the middle of the night when the sun isn't shining, well, solar isn't going to help with that unless you have some way to store that energy and release it when the sun isn't shining. And so that's, again, back to the whole battery story and why lithium is in such big demand. So whether it's oil and gas or if it's lithium, so no matter which part of that energy spectrum ends up being, the big focus, mineral and royalty owners can play a big role in that and can benefit from that, whether it's lithium extraction or if it's oil extraction and things like that. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, bullish again for oil, like we've talked about, the price is going to be dependent on the economies and demand growth. And so supply being able to meet that demand and not exceed it. So again, if we have producers in these OPEC countries going gangbusters and exceeding that demand expectation, then that's where prices will fall. And so ultimately going to be up to the market to decide what the price for these products should be. But, the good thing is I think that demand in general is expected to grow. I think the caveat there I would throw in is dependent on the economic outlook and the global economy and sort of what that looks like. But yeah, definitely I think a positive sentiment there for the future of oil and gas.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. And we've talked about previously, it hasn't come up in a while, but getting the liquid natural gas export plants up and running. It'll be interesting to see if the U.S. can kind of poise itself in a good position to be one of the main suppliers of liquid natural gas to some of these developing countries. It's not the path we're on politically currently, but I have hope that maybe we'll see that become important over the next 10 years.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be, at least for the projects that are permitted, I think the biggest growth in demand for natural gas here in the United States is from these LNG export terminals. And so as long as that continues to be the case, then the price of gas should continue to go up here locally in the United States. Yeah, I think that's the key thing to your point, Justin, is that we have the capability to supply that for these countries. And it'd be good to see the regulatory hurdles, address the regulatory hurdles that have been put in place recently that is limiting that potentially. And I think it will depend somewhat on the next election as to which direction that goes and whether that reverts back to more of a free market type situation or maybe a pro export situation versus opposition to that. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out and then how that plays out for natural gas prices over the next years. And does it actually follow that trajectory we expect? So
you said it, man. All right. So rig count. It doesn't look like we've got any huge moves or shakes, which is not a bad thing by any means. Seems that the operators are kind of holding true and dropping a few rigs here, adding a few rigs there in the more productive places. Matt, over the week, we're at 567 land rigs. That's down one from the previous week. And it looks like we're down 41 units from a year ago.
Yeah, it's sort of stabilizing, back down to that same down one or two week over week or month over month. And so the general theme, I think, is the net loss is loss of one rig in gas centered plays. So you look at the states and the changes there. Colorado lost one, which was from the DJ Basin. Louisiana lost one. New Mexico lost a rig. Texas added two. Utah lost one. And so I think the net change here, the Permian went up by one, DJ went down by one, and then other basins that aren't on this list lost the remainder. And that's kind of why we have one net rig down from last week. But, really kind of at the status quo type scenario, I think, with prices where they're at, and as rig contracts come up, I know companies are looking at capital budgets and trying to optimize that. And so they're dropping rigs to the extent that they're starting to reach their budget for 2024. And so this is not uncommon. And I would not be surprised to see a few more drop just because of spending rates and, efficiencies and things like that. So you may have companies that had planned to do that anyway. And so they've reached their budget for the year. They may lay down a rig for the next 3 months until January, and then, pick it up again in January when they have a capital budget allocated for 2025. So those types of things will start to play into the numbers a little bit, I think. But yeah, generally nothing much to report there.
You said it, Matt. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I just don't think we're there yet because the technology is still being improved. But let's say with lithium, we get the infrastructure in place. We get the royalties worked out because you can bet the oil companies are watching that case and seeing what's going to happen. It'll be interesting to see if we start to see spikes and see them in interesting areas like Pennsylvania and some of the others that are being talked about, but it's not there yet.
Yep, still early for that. But yeah, that would be interesting, as we have these oil and gas areas, that do they start to go after lithium exclusively, to where they're drilling some of these wells into these lithium brine formations and then geothermal, which we've really not talked a whole lot about, but same technology that's used with oil and gas is used for geothermal. So it'd be interesting if we look at Baker Hughes starting to track geothermal rigs and what's going on there. So that could be another area where we see some activity. But big picture here, oil demand forecasted to continue to go up broadly. Activity here in the U.S. is pretty stable. Companies are maximizing their profitability, which is good, means they'll be around in the long term. And these big swings up and down is not something we want to see. That's where you get this boom and bust cycle. And so, to the extent that we maintain oil prices where they're at, where companies can make money, they're not tanking the price of oil just to produce as fast as possible, which doesn't do anybody any good. So I think it's a good spot we're in. I would like to see oil prices continue to go up. They're up about 10% over the past couple of weeks. We're, again, the end of September when we're recording this, but, kind of still up and down day to day, not as high as we were thinking. But again, we talked about in the last news episode how they're talking about prices actually being a little bit lower forecasted for the next year based on the economic outlook globally. And so I think that's continued downward pressure on that, where we're still seeing growth in these developing countries. So it's kind of a tug of war that's going on there, supply and demand wise, I think.
Yeah, you said about to be interesting to see how it goes. And that seems to wrap it up for October. It'll be interesting to see what we see this next coming month. And I'm sure there'll be something about lithium, and I'm sure we'll see something about oil production. So that's always two guarantees right now.
That's right. Yeah. So stay tuned for all the lithium updates, and a lot happening there month to month. And thanks again for listening. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.